Yesterday, the Bulls announced a surprise press conference via Zoom to introduce their latest acquisitions in Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Alex Caruso, and I have to say, it was such a good feeling being a Bulls fan to finally see some quality players being introduced by the organization to the media and to have them actually also be excited about joining the Bulls. Both Lonzo and DeMar expressed their excitement and interest in the organization and what attracted them to the team and what led to their decision in choosing Chicago. So in this video, I'll discuss some of the highlights and key takeaways of what they said, as well as some recent Bulls news that just came out. So what's going on, everyone? You were listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. I know I have said this before, but I think the only thing I have really appreciated about what this new front office has been able to do in their short time with the organization is not necessarily the trade that they made for Nikola Vucevic, the recent acquisitions that have been done in free agency, not their aggressive approach, which all of these things, obviously as fans, we should be very happy about with this new front office. But for me, what has been the most important thing, the most impressive aspect of what this front office has been able to do is literally change the entire culture and perception of the Bulls organization in just a matter of 12 to 18 months. You had DeMar, Lonzo, and Alex Caruso talking about what excited them about coming to play for the Bulls, and it being a historic franchise, how the history and legacy that it carries speaks for itself, and what drew them to the organization. The way they spoke so highly of the front office and trusting in them and valuing them as players like literally never before has a free agent. Not that the Bulls have really been able to bring in that many free agents, but for the ones that they have, you never saw them talking about how great the front office was, how they were personable, how they were genuine people. You hardly ever saw these guys talk about wanting to come to the Bulls because it was a historic franchise. That just wasn't the case, and that's because it was known around the league that the previous front office and Garpax could not be trusted. It was known around the league, for the players anyway, that this front office, not only were they not the most competent, but they were incredibly shady in their handling of the franchise. I mean, this is Chicago. This is the third largest market in the country. This is a historic franchise that has a global fan base because of the dynasty in the house that Michael Jordan built for this team. And yet year after year, we would always strike out on free agents. We had the opportunity to bring in a young and prime LeBron James, a young and prime Dwayne Wade, and hell, it even looked like the Bulls were going to get Carmelo Anthony back in 2015, I believe it was. It almost looked like it was a foregone conclusion that Melo would be coming to the Bulls, and yet he said, no, I'm going to stay with the Knicks. And it's not even just these guys. There were plenty of other big name free agents over the years that the Bulls could have potentially pushed for, and they just weren't able to get them. Again, this is Chicago, a huge market and legacy franchise where you could make your mark as being a hero in bringing a championship back to the city since Jordan. The pitch itself is already easy just for that fact. But no, because Garpax, we had to settle for guys like Carlos Boozer and Pau Gasol as the biggest signings in recent years. And don't get me wrong, Boozer, at least for that first year, played very well. And Gasol, he was an all-star with the Bulls, but he was also past his prime. Oh, and don't even get me started on Dwayne Wade and that whole fiasco where they had to buy out his contract. But the point is that players didn't want to come play for the Bulls. And it became so commonplace and expected for us Bulls fans to just assume that guys don't want to come play for the Bulls, and we're gonna just get the scraps like we always do. But all of that has changed in a blink of an eye with this new front office. Granted, we still have to see how this team performs. We can't get our hopes up just yet and crown AK as the GOAT executive, but this isn't anything we have seen from this Bulls organization in decades. Now, after a bit of a ramble there, aside from that, the players, they were talking about their desire to want to come play for Chicago and their approval of their front office. There were some things that stood out to me in their live press conference answering questions from the media. I believe it was Casey Johnson who asked Lonzo Ball specifically, why Chicago? And Lonzo's response was pretty simple and quite blunt, saying that the Bulls wanted him, that they wanted him for him, and that he wanted to go somewhere where he was appreciated and can play his game. Kind of a subtle shot at the Pelicans, who of course didn't even attempt to try to keep Lonzo, but instead instantly engaged in a sign and trade scenario for him, which frankly wasn't even that great of a return when you consider it was for Satoransky, Garrett Temple, and a second-round pick. And later on in his interview, when he was asked whether he felt that the role the Pelicans gave him of being more of a 3-and-D player rather than a playmaking point guard, if he considered that to be a bit of a demotion and if he had preferred to play a different role. He did dance around that one a little bit and hesitated before answering, but he gave sort of a standard response that, he did what he was asked to do and what was best for the team, which I can respect. Obviously, he's not going to come out and say he hated his role on the Pelicans, but I think most people knew that Lonzo wasn't happy in his role with the Pelicans and thrives much more as an on-the-ball playmaker, especially in transition. Lonzo did also talk about his connection with Zach Lavine, being as they both went to UCLA. Lavine, before Lonzo obviously played at UCLA, but he did first meet Zach Lavine during his recruiting process at UCLA and have actually remained in touch ever since. He also did mention that he reached out to DeMar DeRozan once he heard the news broke that DeRozan would be joining the Bulls, which of course you would love to hear, just seeing that these guys are all just excited to play together. Now, for DeMar, he was interviewed after Lonzo, and like Lonzo Ball, he talked about what attracted him to this team, and that what was exciting to him was the core that they have in Zach Lavine, Nikola Vucevic to go along with Patrick Williams. He also mentioned that once the Bulls added Lonzo, it made the situation even that much more appealing for him, and he did confirm that Mark Eversley, being that they have a prior long-standing relationship, was a key factor in selling him on the idea of joining the Bulls. Now, there was one question in which I found DeMar's response interesting just because of the demeanor in which he approached it. And again, I think this question was also asked by Casey Johnson as well, but he asked about the fit of this team, which I think a lot of Bulls fans and the media, we've talked about and questioned, including myself, how well will Zach Lavine and DeMar DeRozan fit together? And when DeMar was asked this question, his body language changed quite a bit. His tone was a little different, not in a stern or angry way, but it was almost like he was anticipating that specific question would be asked and had prepared himself for how he would answer it. And really, he was pretty blunt in saying that fit doesn't really mean anything. Now, this is basketball. True basketball players, good basketball players will figure out a way to get the job done regardless of fit. He said that if everybody is on the same page and the mentality is that people want to win, it doesn't matter about the fit. He added, if you have that mentality going into it, everything will be figured out. Now, I get what DeMar is saying there, and I agree to an extent, but let's also not deny the fact that fit is an important factor in a team's success, because you can have all of the talent in the world, but if you have players that have very similar skill sets and play the same position, like clearly that's not going to work. But I do agree in that it is critical that the players know their role and all understanding their responsibility and doing what they need to do for the common good of the team, with the ultimate goal of winning, not playing for yourself in a bigger contract, but winning. The media also did speak with Alex Caruso yesterday and talked about really his focus is to help this Bulls team toughen up on defense. Caruso's mentality, which I love that he said what he did, if he wanted to average double figures, he could, but the team probably wouldn't win as many games. And that for him, that's always just been about his mentality, is around winning, how he's really stuck by that, and it's always worked for him. And for this Bulls team, a team that clearly struggled on defense last season, especially perimeter defense, they're going to need a guy like this. A hustle guy, a pest with his on-the-ball defense, never giving up on a play. That's exactly the kind of guy I've been waiting to see for this Bulls team. And he's the guy that is okay accepting a lesser role on offense and focusing on being a defensive specialist. There was an interesting graph that came from B-Ball Index in which they measured defensive impact of point of attack defenders, and Alex Caruso was the #1 player in the league and #3 in aggregate impact for points saved, behind Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris, which honestly, until I started doing more research on Caruso after the Bulls signed him, I had no idea how much of an impact player he was on defense when you look at a host of advanced metrics. Again, yet another reason why this front office is very calculated in who they go after to round out this team based on their needs. Now, aside from these 3 press conferences, there was some additional contractual details that came out yesterday that was reported by SportTrack and then tweeted by Daniel Greenberg, and those were the exact figures of DeRozan's deal, which netted out to be 3 years, $81.9 million, which, just like Lonzo Ball's contract, ended up coming in lower than was initially reported. Caruso, the same thing, just slightly lower than what was initially reported, with this being 4 years, $36 million deal. Javonte Green's contract, we had heard it was going to be a 2-year agreement, but didn't know for how much. It will be $3.4 million. And then finally, Tony Bradley, who is on a 3-year deal at $3.8 million. And then the other piece that came out that was reported by Shams Charania was that the Bulls have signed Dosunmu to a guaranteed 2-year deal at $2.48 million, which I do really like Ayo, and I think, you know, by the second year he'll likely be outplaying that contract, but that is a little high for a second-round pick. You know, most second-round picks, even if they make the team, generally start off on their rookie contract at or somewhere around $1 million, if not below that. For reference, Malcolm Brogdon, who was a second-round pick, made $925,000 in his rookie season in the league, again, as a second-round pick, which again, this isn't really that much more than that. You're talking about close to $1.25 million per season for Ayo, and you can't be too upset about that because Ayo does look better than just a standard second round pick and is worth more than the typical $800,000 or $900,000 that we would usually see second round picks sign when they enter the league. And then finally, the Bulls also officially signed Marko Simonovic, although the amount still hasn't been disclosed. So this Bulls roster is really starting to get filled out. You have 11 guys now who are officially signed and on the roster, or at least no longer free agents anyway. You could throw Markkanen in there to make it 12, since the Bulls did extend him a qualifying offer, but at least at the time of this recording, he is still a restricted free agent. So really, you're looking at 1 to 4 additional roster spots max, and that's likely factoring in two-way deal players. So we'll see how the rest of this offseason shapes up for the Bulls in finalizing this roster. Obviously, there is still the potential for the Bulls to do some sort of sign and trade for Lauri Markkanen, but still not much traction there at the moment. And obviously, the Bulls could still look to trade other players on the roster, but I think that's likely doubtful at this point. I would say the only player that potentially would be considered in trades is Kobe White, and even that, I don't think the Bulls will look to move him, not now anyway, with him being injured. Anyway, I want to know what you guys thought of these live press conferences from Lonzo, DeMar, and Caruso. Were there any key takeaways and callouts that you thought were noteworthy that maybe I didn't mention? And how do you feel about the official signings of some of these other players in Ayo, Marco, and Tony Bradley? Let me know in the comments, and guys, as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.